a podcast about amazing people from an incredible state. Join Mike Broomhead for Amazing Arizonans, presented by Resolution Copper. Copper is essential to Arizona's economy and to America's future. Learn more at resolutioncopper.com.
Episode of Amazing Arizonans, just great stories from right here in the Grand Canyon State. And here's someone that I've been wanting to talk to for a while because he's got such a great story. General Mick McGuire, former Adjutant General of the National Guard is how you're known in Arizona.
Right, that's true.
But I want to talk more about the beginnings of this and how this happened for you, because fighter pilot.
Yep.
Spent your what led you in the direction of A, service to your country, but B, to being a fighter pilot?
Well, that's a great question. My family's originally from Arizona, but my father was a naval officer, so I think I'm a seventh generation military officer, and my paternal grandmother has got ties to the Daughters of the American Revolution.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. But my family first came to Arizona down in Pima County in Tucson in 1929. My father was born actually here in the Valley when his dad was assigned with the railroad up to Phoenix, moved back down to Tucson when a position opened up down there for him. And he decided to get commissioned in the Navy. And as you know, not a lot of ocean front property here in Arizona. So he was assigned to the West Coast. I was born out in California when he was a naval officer. And when he separated from the Navy in 1969, he was a Seabee. He stayed in construction out in Southern California, but all my extended family was here. And went to high school and was recruited to play football. And the only two Division I schools that showed an interest in me were the Air Force Academy and West Point. So it wasn't like I had a burning desire to be a military officer, but I did have wanted to play sports, and it looked like a good opportunity. So I went off to the Air Force Academy, and 2 years into that, I realized everybody at the Air Force Academy that was in charge was wearing what we call the Universal Leadership Badge. They were all wearing pilot wings. So I said, what's this whole thing about making the trees big and small in an F-16 or any other aircraft? And went off to pilot training, and 38 years later, I retired. So
yeah, but you can't gloss over the fact that so few people become pilots, and even fewer than them become pilots of a fighter aircraft.
Yeah.
So you truly were part of the elite.
Right.
That's
well, I at the time I didn't know that, but I decided that was something I was interested in. Was selected out of the Air Force Academy to go off to Shepherd Air Force Base down in Texas, which was a competitive process because all the folks that were selected to go in those days were going to be heading into fighter aircraft when they finished up. And there were 18 Americans in my class of 60. The balance were from Germany, the Netherlands, and Denmark. We had one kid who was from a previous class that was washed back, who was from Italy. So ultimately, we finished up the 18 Americans, and I was one of two guys selected to go fly F-16s. I flew my first assignment at Hill Air Force Base. You call it good luck or bad luck, depending on your perspective. But I was in the 3rd Squadron to deploy over to the Gulf.
What year was that?
Saddam invaded Kuwait. We left on August 24th, and we got in theater on August 26, 1990. My wife, Debbie, was pregnant with our oldest daughter at the time, and when I got home from the Gulf War, she was 4 months old. So I left, she was 6 months pregnant. She was 4 months old when I got home. Happened to fly in the largest daylight raid since 1945 on January 19th, 1991. We had 90 aircraft in that thing. We hit the nuclear research and reactor facility in Baghdad. That's also, if you remember any of that stuff, the first time we had U.S. losses. We actually lost 4 F-16s in that thing, and the first 2 prisoners of war were I was in that same mission package with them, with Tico Tice and Mike Roberts. Fortunately, made it out. 6 weeks later, it ended, And I tell people, when I was a candidate for office, I used to tell people, I believe that was the greatest example of giving the military a directive, which was eject the Iraqis from Kuwait. And then once we did that, we came home. And I did a media interview. I think it was my first media interview because I was the first one to get back. We had in the group that I was in my squadron and in the wing, we had 5 of us who had children that were born in that 7 months we were gone. And Allie was the oldest of the group, so I was the first one that got to go home. It was over, turned around, boom. And when I got home, since, kind of a unicorn, you're the first one back. Everybody's been watching this on CNN and the rest. The local media asked me to do an interview. So I do an interview with, just like with you. And this young lady's, the newscaster says, well, I was a first lieutenant. She says, Lieutenant McGuire, do you think we should have driven all the way to Baghdad? And I looked at her and I said, ma'am, do you understand who I am, right? She said, what? I said, I'm a first lieutenant in the United States Air Force. I get paid to put warheads on foreheads. I am not in the business of making policy decisions about whether we should keep going. We were given a clear directive that had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and we did it. And I think if you fast forward for the balance of my career, one of the things I said repetitively when I campaigned was that, the U.S. military is the greatest point of service operation in the country, at least in the public sector for sure. The challenge is if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So if you I know are very familiar with the situation in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I used to tell people we didn't fight a 20-year war. We fought 20 consecutive one-year wars with a beginning, a middle, and an end in each year. And that's a tough way to run an organization that is operations-based and not thinking about, foreign policy and political outcomes.
When you look at your life then, how combat changed you or molded you maybe would be a better word for it. Was there a time where the aspirations for more leadership came to you? Or was that just who you are as a person? Because I met you, you were a general.
Right.
So I got to meet that product of, all those years. But was that when you were there as a lieutenant in the Air Force flying a combat mission in Iraq, did you ever imagine or did you have dreams of at one time leading an organization like you did?
No, when I was there, in Iraq, specifically in the first Gulf War, it was very clear to me that the success or failure of every one of these missions was going to be predicated on great leadership. And so I sought out great leaders. I tried to emulate them. And I found over time the ones that were the very best at this were confident. They weren't overconfident, but they were extremely confident. And so I wanted to emulate that. And as a lieutenant, you're worried about making captain. And my wife would attest that when I was a captain, she was sure I was not going to be a major, because you remember that the peace dividend that occurred in 1993 to 95 led to a tremendous drawdown in the U.S. military. So there were a lot of my peers weren't promoted. I jokingly say I was clerical error. My second assignment, I came down here to Arizona, so I was back home here in Phoenix out at Luke Air Force Base, and I was one of 14 guys in the country selected to go to fighter weapons school, the Air Force equivalent of Top Gun. So I guess they had to promote me at that point because they'd invested enough money in me to keep me around for a little while longer. I served another 5 years in the active component. Once I completed that, and my wife and I made a decision in 2000 to come back to Arizona, and I transitioned after 14 years in the active component to being a full-time instructor pilot in the F-16 in Tucson. That's how I ended up back here. Never envisioning being the adjutant general or even being a general. I just was enjoying what I was doing. Like you say, it was a very elite group, being a fighter weapons school graduate and doing those kind of things, but really enjoyed being part of just a great team and being a leader on the team. And when I had the opportunity, I was promoted to general as the wing commander down there in 2010. And then I was the wing commander, and when Governor Brewer asked me to come up to Phoenix to be the adjutant general in 2013, that's what brought me up here. So my wife and I relocated then our youngest daughter up to Phoenix, and she did middle school and high school here, and it was great, and still here. Love it.
What's fascinating about the story for me is my conversations I've had with people that are training out at Luke Air Force Base. They are the teachers and trainers out there. Many of them with a similar story of being combat veterans, and asking them the question of looking at those young faces.
Yeah.
And now realizing, having been there yourself, what they may be asked to do. What does that do when you're training somebody new, realizing that training may save their life one day?
Well, it's a huge burden, but we understand that this is a team sport. You're only as strong as the weakest link, right? We do not send F-16 pilots out on their own. We usually travel in minimum of 2, usually 4-ship or larger type formations. Like I said, back on January 19th of 1991, there were 90 of us involved in that thing. That's a lot. It's a lot to manage. But ultimately, about how we do it, we continue to just do great things, and I have great confidence in the young men and women that are out there training at Luke today. I was honored to be an instructor out there, like I said, in the early 90s, from 92 to 95. I went from there to Nellis Air Force Base up to the weapons school, and then spent the balance of my career in Alaska. For 5 years, I was in Alaska, deployed 2 more times. So I deployed a total of 4 times, counting my first trip to the Gulf during the Gulf War in the F-16. And it was great. Every one of those young men and women understand what they're doing. But, ultimately, it's a risky business. The one thing about flying high-performance aircraft is beyond the combat part of it, right? It was kind of a strange dynamic once you get to the point that you're fighting dismounted insurgents in Afghanistan on Kawasaki motorcycles with RPGs on their back.
Yeah. Safest
place to be as an F-16 guy is at 26,000 feet over top of Afghanistan. The worst place to be is in the dining hall.
Yeah.
So that's a big mind shift, right? If you spent your whole life training to be the tip of the spear, and you go back to the Gulf War and even World War II, Vietnam, Korea, and the rest, the way things have changed is we had such air dominance and have had for such a long time that exclusively our fatalities have been in training mishaps and guys collisions with the ground and that kind of stuff, which is never a good thing for anyone. But unfortunately, I used to tell people we strive to have 0 mishaps and a perfect safety record. But if that were a reality, we would never fly.
But I was just talking with somebody about this. I don't think that I've had the privilege as a civilian of being out and watching the training. Yeah. And I was shocked to see how much prep time goes into a mission, even a training mission. Yeah. The hours before you even get in the airplanes.
Right.
And then flying for maybe sometimes an hour and a half, maybe. And then the hours after, debriefing every decision that's made in the interest of that safety you're talking about.
Yeah, I think people get confused when I say this, but maybe, get an opportunity to explain it to you and everybody else. The reason that our U.S. Air Force and our fighter pilot community is so capable is because we're born in a crucible of failure. People are like, what do you mean? I said, because we don't spend 3 hours after we fly a mission telling each other how great we are. Mm-hmm. Right? We don't have a podcast saying you're just the greatest. Mm-hmm. We spend 3 hours, regardless of your rank. You could be a 1-star general or a brand new second lieutenant, and you're going to bear all your scars. We're going to watch the tape. We're going to figure out what we did. And we train to a level that exceeds anything we expect our most near-peer adversary to be capable of doing, so that when we're faced with having to employ lethal force, we're not surprised by anything. Doesn't mean that, all great plans never survive first contact with the enemy, right? But if you spend that kind of time in the prep and the debrief is where we make great fighter pilots. Yeah, you're right. We're in the air for only about an hour and 15 minutes to an hour and a half on average. But you look at some of these articles you read in the media about price per hour of an F-35 and the rest. This is an expensive proposition. You better make sure you make the best of every minute you're out there.
You mentioned something about rank not mattering, and that's one of the things I was told. We did a television interview out at Luke not too long ago with the F-35 training officers. And we were in the, I don't know, do you call it the locker room?
Well, the life support, yeah. You go to life support to get dressed and then put on the equipment, yep.
So we were in the room where all the equipment was, and he was explaining the helmets to me and the expense and what the technology is. And one of the lockers that was right near there was the general's locker.
Right.
And I thought, that's got to be really difficult to fly with the general. And they said, there's no rank when you're in the air.
He's the most nervous of all of them when he's over there because he's had to go to like 75 staff meetings and listen to a bunch of financial briefings about the government shutdown or whatever. And now he's going over there to fly. And he's got some, 33-year-old captain that's leading this thing today. He just wants to make sure he makes it to the end of the runway on time.
So I want to talk about your leadership because when I met you, you were the adjutant general of the National Guard in Arizona.
Right.
And well respected. The people that I knew that knew you respected you for the job you were doing. What's it like being asked by the governor to lead that agency? And was there anything that surprised you about that? Or had you been around long enough where there were no surprises in that leadership role?
Well, it was a big change for me. So I spent 26 years prior to coming up here in 2013 doing exclusively Air Force only, F-16 only. The only aircraft I was ever fully qualified in, manned aircraft, was the F-16. I spent 1 year doing MQ-1, MQ-9 operations over in, we did remote split operations for Afghanistan and Iraq in 2010, 2009, 2010. But besides that, all I knew was Air Force and Air Force stuff. Mm-hmm. So I come up and, as you know, the Arizona National Guard, the National Guard in the U.S. Has a constitutional route in Article 1, Section 8, and it is the group by which we raise our Army. And ultimately, the Air Force only exists because we were born by of and through the Army, right, in the divorce in 1947. So for the first time in my career, we had 8,300 soldiers and airmen and civilians, and I didn't know the difference between a brigade and a company in the Army. So the biggest challenge in the first year was learning to speak a different language. So I jokingly say that I'm about 85% fluent in Army now. Yeah. I spent 8 years of my career as a Joint Forces commander, so I speak pretty good Army. I still have a lot of great relationships with my battle buddies in the Army. And it was a great experience. And, the best, one of my peers was the TAG at Texas at the time, said to me, and I hadn't been the TAG less than a month, and he calls me up, and he was an F-16 weapons school guy. He was the only other F-16 pilot in the country that was a TAG. He was also an Air Force Academy graduate and a weapons school guy like me. He said, Mick, I'm going to just put it in fighter pilot terms for you. If there's a major event domestically in the state of Arizona, call down to the fighter wing, tell them to get a bunch of six-pack trucks, and they'll be out there with 20 or 30 guys in about an hour, helping create some order. And then turn around and tell your Army guys that you want enough food, ice, and water to cover the entirety of Maricopa County. But if you want it now, it's not going to happen. You got to give them about 72 hours to do their military decision-making process and their planning and getting everybody lined up. And it's true. And so, if you think about that, it's really kind of the reason that the Air Force and the Army separated, right? It was all about one group, the Army, believed in centralized control, centralized execution. And the other group, the Air Force, believed in centralized control, decentralized execution. Like, you tell me what you want to do, Mike, and I'll go do it.
Right.
Right? But if you want to go with me and show me how to do it, this isn't going to work.
Not going to work.
Right. So That's really the difference. I learned a lot in that, and you can call it good luck or bad luck, kind of like being a lieutenant and showing up at Minhot Air Base in the middle of the summer in August of 1990 and being one of the youngest lieutenants there, going, "How'd I end up here?" In 2020, here we are mobilizing 85% of the entire force in the first week of June to support 4 different and unique things. We had folks going still to Iraq and Afghanistan. We had 4,000 of them supporting COVID. We had another 1,500 supporting local law enforcement in 8 of the 15 counties. Others had not requested it due to the civil unrest stuff after the George Floyd incident. And then we had, who am I missing? Oh, we had a bunch of wildland fires going at that time. So, you had literally over 6,800 of 8,300 on orders at once. That hasn't happened since 1942.
Wow.
So they were being called in from the radio station. The only ones that didn't get recalled were people that were otherwise healthcare workers or police and fire. Everybody, they were exempt. Everybody else was recalled.
You mentioned earlier about the most dangerous place to be then was in the mess hall. What was it like for you now being the one that was deploying soldiers that were going to be on the ground and in harm's way, and that you knew that there was a chance that some of them weren't coming home?
Well, first, we did lose a number of great Arizona Army National Guardsmen during that period of performance. Fortunately, we lost a number of guardsmen when I was the TAG, but none of them as a result of combat operations in the 8 years I was there. So I was very fortunate in that regard. Didn't mean we didn't lose people from other states and territories at the time. But yes, I think the most challenging part about that was you added this duty as the adjutant general, regardless of service, Army or Air. You had to validate that the unit was ready to deploy, sign off on a form for either the Air Force or the Army that all their training standards had been met. They had all the required prerequisite things to be put on active duty orders to be now mobilized into the Army or the Air Force to deploy. And for each of those, we would have a send-off ceremony, and I would hang out afterwards and chat with the families and the rest. And you could see the duress in their eyes and their concern about that. And while that was a very painful day, it was always great to be able to welcome them back with no losses. It didn't mean that we didn't have some people come home, get injured and those types of things, but fortunately no loss of life, at least in Arizona during that period of time.
I remember being invited to speak at one of the, I don't know what the technical term for it is, but the welcome home ceremonies where you was coming home. And they were giving out awards. They were recognizing deployments,
right?
Number of deployments. And I'm looking at people that are on their 3rd and 4th deployment. And I didn't mean this disrespectfully, but I'm looking at what I thought looked like kids.
Right.
That have been deployed 3 and 4 times into a combat zone. And I don't know that the average civilian understands what kind of a financial strain it could put on a family when you have a civilian job that you're getting military pay, the stress of being apart, and the fear that families feel, my family felt when you have somebody deployed.
Yeah.
And you're asking these families to do it sometimes 3 and 4 times.
It is, I did when I think it was about 2016, I was the TAG, been there about 3 years, and I had my staff pull the total number of deployed days post 9/11 in Arizona by Arizona National Guardsmen, Army and Air. So I said, I want all the number of days that we've been deployed, and I want to divide that into years, right? 365 days in a year, and then divide that into the number of people. And it came out to that on average, each of the nearly 8,300 guardsmen in the state had been on orders for almost 3 years since 9/11. Wow. So you think about that, they work here at KTAR or they work at Gordon's firm or whatever, and they get called out on orders, right? Cumulatively, the stress that puts on not only their family, but the community. And I used to say to people, when we would do those weekly press conferences during COVID, I said, look, the people you're out there seeing do these things are your neighbors, your teachers, your first responders, you go to church with them. They are the fabric of the community, and they are very much. I said at the time, they are the next greatest generation. That generation of young men and women that deployed, the difference between when I deployed as a lieutenant in my early 20s, a 24-year-old, 25-year-old in 90, versus what's happened since then is the pace at which we would deploy some of the ground-based forces, the Army and Marine Corps, was alarming. It was a lot of turns, and I think we've seen a lot of that in society with how they've handled the response. The community has been great. You can't go anywhere without someone saying thanks for your service. But it's taken a toll on those young men and women, as you know, with all the things done with suicide prevention and things at the VA and those kind of things.
During your time in leadership, most difficult decision you had to make, and what was it that helped you make the decision? If you can narrow it down to one, but a very, very difficult decision you had to make, and what helped you make the decision? For me personally, the most difficult decision? Yeah. Probably the most pushback I got on a decision I made was to not deploy soldiers and airmen to Washington, D.C. on the 16th of January of 2021, after the January 6th incident. I've answered many questions about this, and ultimately the reason, and it's come up recently, I talked to the media the other day about all that's happening. Ultimately the reason that I did not do it was we had no presidential authorization to be there, and that the fact that 53 others had said yes, other states and territories, does not mean that changes the rule of law. We are a constitutional force. We take an oath that we're sworn to protect and defend the president, and regardless of what individuals think of one president or another, the change of responsibility occurs on the 20th of January. And so in that intervening time from the 6th to the 20th, there was no direct communication. I just couldn't do it. And yes, got a lot of calls questioning my decision from a lot of different levels. You have to have the ability to stand. When it came up recently, though, I was talking to some of our local media members, and I said, hey, you guys got to help tamp some of this down. And they said, what do you mean? I said, if the president from either party deploys forces in the Guard and asks them to come on active duty to defend a federal installation like the courthouse in Portland, that is fully within his authority, with or without the consent of the governor. That is completely different than crossing the street in Portland and then forcing the laws in Oregon. And they said, well, what about in Memphis? I said, well, if the governor, who's a Republican in Tennessee, says they would like to mobilize a portion of the Tennessee National Guard to assist local law enforcement, or Frank Slope or any of the rest of them out there, right? And the governor consents to it, every state has an authority by which the Guard is unique and separate than the active component, where it can operate under either state active duty or Title 32, where it can be exempt from the posse comitatus law that prohibits the military from doing civil law enforcement. And I said, the problem that I have is in the media space, each side, both sides are guilty of it, decide when they want to use this as a club to club the other side over the head. And I would implore my peer senior leaders to just stay true to what the constitutional requirements are for you. You follow the law. If it's legal, moral, and ethical, I don't really care what your political opinion is. You take the uniform off, you can have whatever opinion you'd like. So you being as straightforward, blunt, and some would say, which I think is to me is an asset. But then you decided you were going to run for office.
Right. And I had a portion of my brain removed. And I didn't know that was an irreversible surgery. And
in all seriousness, because of what is an asset in a leadership role in the military, what is an asset in a leadership role in other places, which is I'm going to be direct, and I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to do what I believe is right.
Right.
How does that fit
Well, I think that level of sincerity and transparency and authenticity is really important.
I do too.
In the political space. I don't think that my approach to the constituency that I was courting during that primary was negatively received. I think if you went out into the body politic and talked to the folks on pretty much all sides of it, I'm still the same guy I was before I started. The challenge in the political space is that a lot of it has to do with just, let's be honest, in the current political space, if you have the endorsement of the seated president of the United States, you're in good shape. And at the time, we were in a interterm period, right, between 2016 and the 2024 election. And that carries a big stick in the primary. Will it continue that way? I expect it will for a good period of time. And so I don't have any regrets, though. People have asked me about that. You can't go back. I can't go back now and, put on a uniform and say, okay, I'm General McGuire again. Just treat me like before, because it is a one-way door. I tell my colleagues that say, hey, I'm interested in doing that. Okay. Well, you got to work harder than I ever worked in the military. You get up every morning at 6 a.m. and you go to bed at midnight, Monday through Saturday, wash, rinse, repeat. You go to places in the state nobody's ever been before or have even know are in Arizona, and they're glad you're there. But as you know, you can dominate the 13 rural counties. And if Pima County and Maricopa County have an idea, there's not enough humans in the other 13 rural counties to overcome that.
So walk me through what made you decide to want to do it, because you don't strike me as someone that's going to do something on a whim, that there's a mission, that there's a reason.
So if you go back to this event in January of 2021, it was clear to me that there were terms thrown out in some of my discussions with senior officials at the Department of Defense around my objection that, well, Senator fill in the blank told me this was okay, or the congressman or congresswoman fill in the blank said this was okay, or the vice president said it was okay. Mm-hmm. All of which I said, that doesn't make any difference at all. I mean, what they don't have the statutory authority to do this, right? And we make decisions at times where people, I wasn't joking. One day I wasn't going really well in one of my calls with some senior leaders at the Pentagon, and I said, well, listen, if you think I'm wrong, just turn the president's Twitter account back on and let him say, send him, and I'll be there tomorrow.
Yeah.
He said, what? I said, we hadn't heard anything for a week. What are you talking about? You're supposed to, you're asking me to believe that someone who was elected. So I said, well, there's no better way to start flipping over some tables than to be one of them and say, you can't do that. I don't care how senior you are. I don't care if you're the majority leader or you're the minority leader or you're the Speaker of the House. There's only one chief executive.
So you are going to be perceived, and you had to know it, by some then as not being a team player. Oh, yeah. So to me, I mean, I always admired your honesty. I still do. But that's for me is the contradiction in my head I'm trying to reconcile, that you had to know up front. I define the team as I'm an American. I'm an American soldier, American airman. And I took an oath that I'm sworn to protect and defend the Constitution. I'm on that team. Right. If you say I'm not playing for the team because the rest of the team left without you and they are following an order that I believe lacks legality, then I'm on the right team, even if I'm only by myself. Right. And I agree with you. But you now are going to run for an office in the United States Senate. Right. With now carrying a bag that you willingly carried, which says, when push comes to shove, you're not necessarily going to be a team player. Which was red meat for the base. They loved it. They loved it. They're like, dude, this guy will tell anybody no. Right. Right.
But not to be disrespectful, but if you don't have the proper authority to issue legal, moral, ethical orders, I don't really care what you think. I'll give you an example. You asked about decisions. I was a wing commander at Tucson. And at the time, we were having a debate about whether or not the F-35 wasn't a debate. We were one of 4 sites, including Luke Air Force Base. So there are 2 guard sites here in Tucson and Boise, Idaho, and 2 active component sites, Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico and here at Luke, that the Air Force was evaluating for initial bed down. There was a woman in Tucson who would write me a letter every single day objecting to the noise, the problems, the military, all the rest of it. You can imagine the letters I got. Mm-hmm. So we have to have public testimony, and I have to get up and I give a speech, and she comes up to me afterwards, and she says to me, General, I've written you a letter every day for a year, and you have not responded to me. And I said, well, that's not true. My public affairs guy has sent a response to every one of your letters. So you haven't. And this is about civilian control of the military. I said, okay, I agree with you. It is about civilian control of the military. You know how we exert civilian control of the military? Every 4 years, you have an opportunity to select the federal and state commander-in-chief. And if you want to change that person, go change them. And if they want me to have a meeting with you, I will. But if I had to respond to every single person that had an objection to something that was going on because it was civilian control of the military, nothing would happen.
She had to be happy with that conversation.
Well, I was just being blunt with her. It's not about expressing an opine about whether she should be upset with the noise. She should like the F-35. She shouldn't like the F-35. It's about this misperception in society that if I say, well, civilian control of the military means you work for me. Well, that's sort of true. But really, when we take an oath to protect and defend the Constitution, it's not the document. It's all the people.
Right.
All the people, skin color, religious preference. I don't care about any of that stuff. All I know is we are the ones that are sworn to protect and defend the document that has created the greatest republic in the history of the world. It's imperfect, but it's better than anything else. And if it was so bad, why would we have an immigration problem?
Right. And I think that, and what I'm getting to with the questions are that bluntness and that willingness to say, I'm going to tell you the truth, even if it's not what you want to hear,
yeah,
is not what we normally see in someone that's shaking hands and kissing babies
right.
trying to run for an office.
They tell them what they want to hear.
Right.
Are you going to, I've in
a non-committal way
political
sometimes.
Consultants used to tell me, like, what are you going to do for them? Probably nothing. And that's okay. I mean, how has the federal government ever solved something for you?
You're preaching to the choir.
If you think about it, like, I remember seeing Senator McCain. I was a tag. We went to an event, and I had a number of meetings with him. And he got up and he said, I remember the first time I got elected to the House of Representatives, I came home and I got a phone call from one of my neighbors that said, Congressman McCain, no one picked up my trash today. And he said, well, I don't know if anybody picked up mine either, but we got to call the city of Tempe, this is a problem. All politics are local. It wasn't that I was trying to remove myself or jump the ladder or do any of that kind of stuff. It was that if we continue to buy into this narrative that because you're elected to the U.S. Senate, you should have the ability to mobilize 26,000 soldiers into D.C. without the proper order, that's not right. I don't care how much you receive from donors in your campaign.
No, I agree with you. And it's refreshing to a lot of people to hear that story, to know that it actually happened that way and that you were just going to do what you knew to be right and defend it.
I mean, they didn't want to let me go. I told him, call Governor Ducey. You guys can't do anything in D.C., but if he wants to dismiss me from his cabinet, he can.
So moving beyond that, you are done with running for office. Life after that, what is it that you want? Like, what's next for you? What are you involved in now? What is it that you want? What's motivating you now? What are you passionate about now?
Well, right now I've been spending quite a bit of time beyond spending time with the family, which is great. Got 3 great grandkids here in the Valley. I've been doing a lot of leadership mentoring. I like doing that, coaching people. So I do some leadership consulting. I work with a number of different CEOs about, I would do that. I probably wouldn't do that. That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It is very, I've found that in like corporate America that you have the same problem, right? Like you go back to the January 6th issue. A lot of people just want to get promoted so bad, they'll say yes to just about anything. Mm-hmm. And there's nobody sitting at the table telling the CEO of KTAR, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Like you go to a staff meeting and the guy says, hey, man, I think KTAR should become a software development company. And the guy who's the number 2 guy goes, well, okay, it's a business opportunity. And no one says, we don't have any software engineers. Are you kidding me? Yeah. We're not a technology company.
We're a radio station.
No, nobody says that. They sit there and go, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. So as an outside guy, I can go in there and say, don't do that. But what makes you Coca-Cola? Why does everybody ask for a Coke? Just keep making Coke. Don't do new Coke.
Yeah.
Right? Think about new Coke. That's probably the greatest example. Somebody convinced them this was a good idea. How'd it go?
No one told them no.
It was a disaster.
Yeah.
Right? Because the group
Cracker Barrel.
Yeah. The group think is like, you just tell them yes. They'll make you the boss someday. You get a bigger paycheck and have a new car and all that. Okay, I guess. That's what motivates me is keeping people motivated. I used to tell them, look, there are only 2 requirements to be a member of the formations that I led. You had to be able to tell me the truth and give your best effort. That's not hard. And, we used to talk about service members leaving the military and their skills. And I'd go and meet with, we'd have like civic engagement groups. This was, prior to the COVID thing. And you'd have, business leaders go, oh, General, we're having such a hard time with workforce development. We need welders. We need guys working here or there. I'd say, yeah, you don't need anything other than somebody that's willing to do those 2 things and just shows up on time. All these companies know that they're going to train you to do the rest. That's what we do in the military, right? We got guys that are air conditioner repairmen and guys that are F-16 pilots. They're no greater or lesser. They just have different set of duties, authorities, and responsibilities.
The key to my success when I got into the trades at 18 years old was I showed up on time and I did what I was asked.
Exactly.
And I tell people all the time, I am remarkably average. And I just showed up and I worked hard.
That's right.
And I had bosses that trained me to do everything I ever learned on their dime.
That's right.
And I ended up a small business owner because somebody else was willing to teach me, but I showed up and was willing to learn. And it's not a remarkable skill. It's just a willingness to learn.
Well, and I remember one of my first things that happened when I was a tag is we had an election. I'd been with Governor Brewer for about 18 months. Governor Ducey came in. We had this event up at the Capitol where we're focusing on education here in Arizona. It's a big topic. Mm-hmm. You cover the radio every season.
Yep.
Electoral season, we talk about education spending. Afterwards, I talked to one of the governor's policy people, and I said, so just from a metric standpoint, we got about 1 million kids in Arizona, about 1 million. How many of them are going to go to college and graduate? About 28%. How many of them are going to go into hourly labor right out of not even do the junior college system, just go right and go do hourly work? About 25%. I said, okay. What are the other 52% doing? Or whatever it is. 48%, right?
Yeah.
What are they doing? Like, it's basically half. Are they playing Xbox and hanging out at their parents' house? I mean, this is a problem. That's the group that you need to tap into. And you need to tell them that if they're told, well, you don't have an education or you don't have, it's not that you shouldn't do that, but really, if you can tell me the truth and you can work hard, give me your best effort, we'll teach you the rest of it. And, it's like that. You get that basic reading, writing, arithmetic. They do a great job in high school. They're ready to go. They don't all need to be college graduates, but there was this kind of this education mafia that was pushing everybody's got to go to college. Well, okay. I'm not sure that's true.
Yeah, and for me, it wasn't a motivation or a thought process. I got very, very lucky with falling into the trade and fell into what I love, but I was always motivated by the people maybe in your industry there's a similarity, and that is you were a seasoned fighter pilot that was now teaching the next generation.
Yeah.
I learned to be an electrician from a guy behind a desk that put the tools on like I did for the first time. So I was learning from someone who was hands-on doing it.
Right.
And I think there's not just a nobility to that. I think there's a respect that this person knows what I'm going through.
Right.
But I also know that he got there starting where I was.
Right. That's right. It's about walking a mile in their shoes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think you respect someone that you know has been there.
Yeah.
You're going to send me up in an attic and I'm going to go climb in that attic, but I know you've been up there too.
Right. Exactly.
So, listen, I appreciate the time talking to you. It's always good to catch up with you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
It's
good
fun.
to be on. I did a lot of media for 18 months. Been kind of a break.
Well, I'm glad you chose to do this with me.
All right, thanks.
All right, so the Amazing Arizonans podcast, as you can see, these are stories from the Grand Canyon State. Watch some of the other episodes. Let us know what you think, and thanks for watching this one.
Thanks for watching Amazing Arizonans, presented by Resolution Copper. Tap the button in the middle to subscribe to KTAR News.